All right, everybody, it's time for the Science Nights. Just after
Conley, hey.
Conley,
Yeah, huh? What?
take off the medical mask. You don't need it.
What?
Nobody can hear you. You got to take that thing off.
We're talking about coronavirus today.
Take it off, man. You're gonna be fine. You don't need it. It's gonna be fine. Are you
okay, all right,
already
it's
sick?
off.
Are you already sick?
No, I feel great,
You got
actually.
nothing, then yeah,
Okay.
Hey, guys.
the mask. You don't
No.
need it.
Okay, so we don't need the medical mask. That is counterintuitive, if you will. And apparently, you touch your face a lot more when you have masks on it, per Dr. Etka Escobar. We had an interview with her earlier this week, and that was a great interview about coronavirus.
It was.
But I am here assembled with the Science Knights. Again, if you couldn't hear me over the muffling of my medical mask, this is Conley. It's just after 10 o'clock here at Alpine Radio Studios. And we're talking with Dr. Sean Graham and Dr. Thomas Shiller about coronavirus today. And there are a lot of rumors, speculations, facts, fiction
It's amazing.
that we need to get down to the core of. And that's the purpose of today's show, really.
I spent the last 5 days down the rabbit hole. It was bizarre. And I checked up. I followed every lead and I checked on every little thing. And I found some amazing surprises. And
Did you see Alice?
Alice wasn't down there. It was closer.
Alice.
Yeah, it was bad. Some of it got real nasty, and some of it was really hard. It was really hard to find out whether something was true or not. And that's why I'm calling this the first post-truth pandemic. It's going to be very difficult for people to understand what's going on because there's so much misinformation out there.
Pandemic meaning it's global.
Yeah, it is global now, and only in the last week basically that happened. This is a fast-moving story. We're recording this. By the time you hear this, things will have already changed. It's nuts, and that was another thing that was very difficult to work out doing research on this because it was happening. Everything's happening so fast. By the time I was done my research, I had to go back and check on other stuff. It's crazy.
Okay, so should we begin by defining what a virus is for our listeners?
Yeah, we can just briefly talk about that. A virus is just a piece of genetic material that's kind of off on its own, doing its own thing. It's either DNA or RNA. Those are both possible pieces of genetic material. So it's basically, think of it, we've talked about genes before, and the analogy we kind of used was that a genome is all the genetic material that makes you. And that would be a humongous volume. It'd be a huge encyclopedia. And a gene is just one page in that encyclopedia that codes for a single item, one protein. And so a virus is like a few pages from an encyclopedia that's more or less kind of escaped that encyclopedia and is going and finding other encyclopedias to invade. And then it uses the cell's machinery to make copies of itself. It can't do anything on its own. It can barely do anything on its own. And it can kind of survive on its own a little bit. It can, some viruses can survive on surfaces for a while. They can survive in droplets of water, and some aren't very good at that. They can't survive outside of a host very long at all, and so they don't survive on surfaces very well. So it just kind of depends. But eventually they get inside your cells, and then they're going to use your cell's machinery to make copies of themselves. And then they have the audacity on their way out of the cell to kill the cell that they're in. When they leave the cell, often viruses will cause that cell to rupture. Cell lysis will occur. I'm actually not sure if that happens in this case. It doesn't always happen. Sometimes it's just your own immune system's response to this virus. It's kind of this overwhelming kind of inappropriate response that ends up causing the sickness. So this one seems to be like that. The virus gets in there, starts replicating like crazy. And that's what it is. They're just really good at replicating and making copies of themselves. They're very selfish. They're these selfish genes that are floating around everywhere. And your body already has viruses in it. There's some estimates that the human genome has something like 9% of your genome is virus that's got in there. And they can insert themselves into your genome. Viruses that do that, they'll insert themselves in your genome and they never leave. They just stay there. And then every time your cells divide, they make copies of this virus. And you can pass it on to your children. It's inherited. So those viruses actually aren't that bad. You can have, and they've done good things for us. Certain viruses have been given us these genes that have allowed our immune system to do amazing things. So in this case, this is one that causes fatalities. And so that's what it is.
So so to kind of apply a scale to this, viruses are even smaller than like a bacteria, right? Viruses can attack bacteria.
Yeah, there's whole classes of viruses that can invade bacteria, and it's a great idea to get it for scale. So bacteria are really small too. Your cells are about 40 to 100 times bigger than a bacteria, and viruses are significantly smaller than bacteria. So really tiny. We didn't, for the longest time, it's very difficult to even image these things because you need to be able to see really close. You need a scanning electron micrograph, electron microscope. An ordinary light microscope will not capture a virus. You can't see them with at the highest magnification of the light microscopes you guys might have had in your high school or something like that. You can't see viruses. You could barely see bacteria with those at the highest magnification. So they're really tiny, and they're everywhere. And this one seems to have emerged probably from wildlife populations somehow in China. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about where it emerged from. The origin. We got some pretty good clues, but we don't know. And I'm going to make you guys this promise. A couple things. I'm not an MD. I'm not a doctor. And so I'm going to try to avoid saying things real certainly, with any kind of certainty about medical issues and medical advice. I think the MDs from Big Bend Medical Center did a great job on that show, and you can see it on the link that we're going to provide for you. And the other thing is that I'm going to say when I don't know things because nobody knows. This is happening so fast that the information just isn't available. So I'm gonna we don't know everything to begin with, the Knights. And in this case, that's definitely true because in many cases, nobody knows the answer to some of these questions. And I'm going to try not to speculate because there's going to be a lot of, we're going to talk a lot about people who've already done that.
Yeah. And I study things that are a lot bigger than viruses. So I'm just going to ask dumb questions.
Yeah,
and,
that's great.
Sit here and listen to.
I think your feedback will be cool. And I think you guys we're going to get some good surprises here. So what I'm going to do first, I got a couple things we're going to do. I made basically a timeline. That's the way I organized it for myself.
Patient zero.
Yeah. We actually have a clue of who that person might be. I don't know. I mean, I don't know his name or anything like that. But the early epidemiological studies that are coming out of China have identified at least the first known patient, and it's going to surprise you when and where that patient was. So we're going to do a timeline and kind of go through, and we're gonna talk about stuff that is true and not true that happened over the past couple of months. Okay, and we're going to separate fact from fiction. Plus, I was very curious. There was many of these crazy rumors circulating. I was curious about how effective the misinformation has been. So I polled my students. I polled 42 students. So these are biology students. This is really a biased poll, right? This is not a representative sample of people whatsoever. Right. They're all young, right? They're all in their 20s. They're all biology students who should know a thing or two, right, about biology. And so I just did it just to get a feel for how much the misinformation might be infiltrating your average person. And these aren't really average people, but it's a terrible poll, not scientific. Don't believe it, but it'll give you some ideas. There's a couple of places
it'll give you a generality, right?
Yeah. A couple of things jumped out. And most of it's not very surprising, but some of it jumped out.
Okay.
So I'm going to start with patient zero, like you said. December 1st, 2019. Okay.
Very recent.
It's very recent, yeah. But that's longer ago than what most people consider the beginning of the outbreak. If you talk to most people are focusing on the Wuhan market, right? The food market, the seafood market, where the first cluster of pneumonia cases were noticed. And they're seeing fatalities, pneumonia patients, and they're testing them for known viruses that cause pneumonia, and they're not getting hits. And so they find RNA material in the lungs, and it's a new coronavirus. That happened. This big food market case happened December 31st, 2019.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So a whole month. And guess this is the most crazy part. Nobody's talking about this. And this is something I think is really interesting. The first case, December 1st, this person had no contact at all with anybody at the Wuhan seafood market. So he didn't get it from the seafood market. It was already circulating. Probably somebody had it, brought it to the seafood market, and then a bunch of people got it there from when it spread through. So all the talk about, all the crazy animals that they might be eating at the seafood market as the possible reservoir host, basically, we don't know. We have no idea where this started now. It most likely came from an animal, and we have some ideas we'll get to about which one it's most likely. But this didn't start at the Wuhan seafood market, which is what most people's perception. I'll just jump to one of my questions that I asked my students. And they had a question of where did this emerge from? And the potential answers were the zoo, a food market, eating bats, and eating pangolins. And we're jumping ahead here talking about the possible reservoir hosts. These are animals. Pangolins are really cute animals, mammals that have scales all over them, right? They look really weird. They look almost like an armadillo. And this is the first you're hearing of this? Because this has been big news. That potentially... This
is the first I'm hearing of it. Yeah.
Pangolins are potentially, and they are potentially the host, the reservoir host for this virus. And it might have jumped from pangolins. And the way that it would have done that is because pangolins are heavy in the black market wildlife trade in China, because they use the scales as some sort of status symbol. The typical thing. And so China's been getting hammered for this for months. Like, are
they endangered?
They are. They're critically endangered. They're getting wiped out.
Look up a photo of one, Conley.
Yeah, they're really cool.
Neat looking. And
so early reports were suggesting that pangolins might be the reservoir host. So I polled my students, and 5% thought it came from a zoo, 70% thought it came from a food market. So that idea that it came out of the Wuhan seafood market is pretty prevalent. Even though it's there was a cluster of cases there, but that's not where it originated. 31% thought it came from eating a bat. Now, did you guys hear about that? The bat?
I haven't heard about the bat thing.
That's crazy, because that's another big one. Because some news source, let me see, I got to make sure I get this right. The January, where is it? So I got to go down my... Some news source claimed that from eating bats, Chinese people eating bats, January 24th, the Daily Mail, which is kind of a dodgy web news source, posts revolting viral video of Chinese woman eating a bat, and that implied transmission from bats. That picture was from like a game show 2 years ago.
All right.
It was total nonsense.
Yeah.
And 30% of my students...
So
it's sunk in.
Thought of it, yeah.
And some of these things are just like, you could say, one or two people believe whatever. Two people thought it was zoo. That probably just means they have no idea and they guessed. But, a good chunk of my students probably saw that viral footage, right? And that made an impression.
So are bats common vectors for human viruses?
They are. And honestly, currently the closest living relative to this virus came from a bat. When they look at the relatedness of the coronaviruses to the animal coronaviruses that are out there, its closest relative is from a bat, not from a pangolin. So pangolins are probably not the most close host, but they could be circulating within bats and pangolin. There's some evidence that there's part of the genetic material of this virus might have came from pangolin. It's close to pangolin coronaviruses, but it's closest to bats. That's the closest one we have. It's the best evidence we have. But the idea that it was from eating bats at this food market, that's just a bunch of hocus pocus getting jammed together, right? And so none of it's true. The food market's not where it started. Nobody was eating live bats except on a game show 2 years ago, and it didn't happen 2 years ago, so that's a phony one. Okay, so we got to where it came from. We don't know.
We don't know.
December 30th. Before the big outbreak at the Wuhan seafood market, a Chinese whistleblower, a doctor named Li Wenliang, warns his co-workers of a that the cases were very SARS-like.
Oh, right, yeah.
So he warns a couple of his co-workers, and then the Chinese authorities accused him of making false statements, and he was kind of getting in trouble. And that whole thing is true. This idea of this whistleblower. Sorry. So China's starting to get a lot of flack for the way they've handled this, and people are pointing to this whistleblower that they kind of stifled. And it was just a day later that the seafood market kind of outbreak happened. And on January 1st, they closed the market. They went in there and nuked it with, bleached it out and sterilized it. And by the 10th of January, we've got a new coronavirus designation by the World Health Organization. So after the original kind of stifling the information, the Chinese really stepped up their game and started trying to control this thing. On January 22nd, a paper, by this time we already had the entire genome of this virus sequenced. We can do that very fast now. And they looked and compared it to known coronaviruses, and the first report that it came from a snake appeared, because a paper showed that it showed some sort of snake-like, so snakes can have coronaviruses apparently, and there were some similarities to a snake coronavirus, and this has since been discredited.
Sure.
But the news went viral. So some of my students think this came from a snake, 7%. So the animal host for this virus, I asked them whether it was a pangolin, a snake, a bat, a beer, or a chicken.
A beer or a bear?
A beer. Corona. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And you're going to love this part. So 21% thought pangolin, and that actually could be true. 7% said snake. 50% said bat, which is probably actually the closest. None of my students thought it was from beer. And 14% thought chicken. I don't know where they got that.
Chicken.
Just a red herring there, and they fell for it. So the beer thing. The beer thing.
Kinesiology matrix?
Yeah, potentially.
No,
they
I'm just kidding.
Probably just looking in their McDonald's bag. And okay, so you guys have heard that Corona, right? The beer company has.
I've never had a beer. I don't know what that is. What is a beer?
So it's this alcoholic beverage that you're not allowed to drink on our college campus. So it's a good thing you don't know anything about it. So Corona, what have you guys heard about Corona beer in reference to coronavirus?
It's
the sales
terrible,
are dropping.
and you have to drink it with a lime.
Sales are dropping.
Sales are dropping.
What else?
And it gives people coronavirus.
Right, people. Yeah. So
apparently, quote unquote. It does not, though.
This is the part I think is one of my favorite parts, and I just finally confirmed this today because I suspected that all of that was not true. That I doubted anybody would be that stupid, and I'm right, because all of that's not true. Beer sales worldwide are down right now because China is on lockdown. And Chinese people, there are 1.3 billion of them.
Sure.
And so if they're sitting at home and can't go outside to get a beer, they're not drinking beer.
Right.
So beer sales in general are down, not just Corona. There was a poll done, a dubious poll done by some sort of a marketing outfit that asked people questions about coronavirus and Corona beer. And the media went with it immediately and just went running with these stats. Like 38% of people are not going to drink Corona, and 14% or something like that couldn't distinguish whether Corona beer was the cause of the coronavirus. All of that is not true. The news organizations took it and ran with it. It's everywhere. It's all over the web. Nobody went and actually bothered to see what the questions were on this poll. The question, will you drink Corona beer? That was the question. That means that 38% of people don't like Corona beer. Doesn't have anything to do with coronavirus.
They get the answer they want by how they ask the question.
You got it,
right?
yeah. So it was a dubious poll. One could argue it was done by corporate espionage from another beer company trying to hurt Corona's reputation. Corona never bought it. They were like, no, our customers are not morons, and our sales are fine. And so they're doing fine. That's one of the big myths that I uncovered.
I'm going to go with the corporate espionage hypothesis because in Mexico the beer companies are like
Cutthroat.
It's like they're cutthroat. It's like a war. You have your beer that you drink, and if you drink the other one, then you're out.
Yeah. Absolutely. So that's the first of our big reveals on this show. There's going to be a lot more. You guys got to stick around, and we're going to separate more fact from fiction on Science Nights in the Morning. Hello, we're back, everybody. Science Nights in the Morning. I'm just going to jump right back in on that timeline. If you guys have been listening, I'm kind of recounting the history of coronavirus starting way back in the dark ages of December of last year. That's when it all started. So we're right at, let's see, January 22nd. That's when the news of the snake, that it might have came from a snake, went viral. And that was about the time that the Knights got back from their kind of winter vacation. And January 22nd, an unnamed scientist associated with the Science Knights in the morning said he heard that they had a vaccine for coronavirus that only worked on Eurasian people.
What?
Yeah. Don't you remember that?
I don't remember that.
Well, it must not have been you.
It wasn't me.
It must not have been you.
Who could it have been?
I'm just saying it's this unnamed person associated with Science Nights in the morning. That's what he heard. Not sure where. I couldn't find anything about that. I looked really hard.
He said it was in Sweden, I believe.
Probably, yeah. I think I remember him saying Poland. Some Polish scientists figured out a vaccine, but only basically it works for Caucasian people.
Yeah.
That's not true, folks. There is no vaccine for this virus, and there probably won't be for a couple of years. And so we're going to be dealing with this virus for a while without a vaccine. January 24th is when the Daily Mail posted the video of the woman eating the bat. January 24th, Shiva Ayadurai. This might be related to January 22nd thing. He's a candidate for U.S. Senate in Massachusetts. He on Facebook, he asked, why is there already a patent for a coronavirus vaccine on Facebook? And that goes viral. And what he was looking at is that there are patents for other coronavirus vaccines, for other coronaviruses, not this one. And so it's just a misunderstanding. But people kind of said, oh, there must be something going on then if they already have a vaccine. And that's kind of related to what we were just talking about. We don't have a vaccine for this virus. This is a cool one. January 24th, China announces it's going to build a 1,000-bed hospital in 10 days. True or false?
I would say true.
Yeah, and they did it. They did it. Yeah, so there's been a lot of trash talk. People have been trash talking China. Part of this is because of that case of the whistleblower, and there's, so people are thinking there's all this secretiveness happening and everything. And so they've been getting hammered, this idea of that they're eating weird things and they're, keeping it a secret, and yet they have contained this virus, right? It's amazing what they've done. They built a hospital of 1,000 beds in 10 days. And they managed to lock down some pretty big cities, and the cases in China have now plateaued. They've reached a point where they're starting to level off instead of explode. I think China has saved a lot of lives by what they did. And imagine what they did. Picture this. Wuhan, China. How big do you think it is? We talked about this before. You can't guess, so I'm going to make
okay.
Tom. How many people? Right. What's the population of Wuhan?
Wuhan, China. I'm going to say 6 million. That's
pretty close. It's somewhere between. It varies. Somewhere between 8 and 11 million. The largest U.S. city by population is 8.5 million. New York City. So it's about the size of New York City, our biggest city. Wuhan is the 9th largest city in China. What's the 9th largest city in the United States?
I know.
Yeah, he knows.
Should I say?
You want to guess? You could say it.
Dallas, Texas.
That's what Texas. I was going to guess.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
I should have said it.
So you imagine if this had happened in Dallas, Texas, and the government said, we're going to tell everybody in Dallas, Texas, that they can't go outside until this is over. That's what China did. And it worked.
Wow.
Yeah, that would have been pretty hard to do. And I think we're going to be seeing that. Now it's here, right? It's in Texas. And we're going to maybe start to see that sort of thing, and we're going to have to see whether or not our government is willing or even able to try to do something like that, or would even attempt it. I doubt it. So we're going to see potentially a lot more spread here than what they had in China. So all the people who've been bad-mouthing China and their response over the past 2 months are going to be eating crow, because I think they did an amazing job. I'm just looking at it from a scientific standpoint, and if you want to contain an epidemic, right, you might have to resort to drastic measures, and they've done some crazy things. So by February 3rd, the Wuhan hospital started admitting patients. February 7th, the Chinese whistleblower died of coronavirus.
Oh,
that's true.
Wow.
February 7th, so that's when this story about it potentially being related to coronaviruses in pangolin came out. and that it's been spread around. And the kind of media really went with this because this is it's like too good to be true for the pangolin, because conservationists have been trying to protect this animal for 10 years now or longer. And this has been an incredible windfall for that species because, China has clamped down on more than they were already trying on the black market trade. And I think probably people are a little worried about going near pangolins now. So this is a very good thing for pangolins. I wondered if it was just too good to be true, that it could just be total BS. But it turns out it really does have a close relative. The virus that's circulating in pangolins is a close relative of this virus, and it's possible that that's where this coronavirus came from.
So, where else would it come from if it
probably bats is my
from
guess.
bats?
Yeah.
Okay,
and not from people eating them. Bats get into people's houses. People go near where bats are. Bats are everywhere, and bats are hosts for a lot of viruses that you guys have probably heard of, rabies, all kinds of stuff. Bats have lots of things, and so it's pretty likely it came from bats somehow.
And or pangolins, right?
Yeah, it's possible. Yeah. It's possible. Right now, the closest relative is a bat, so it kind of puts a damper on that idea that it could have came from pangolin. But it's still possible there could have been some sort of mixed transmission or something like that, where you had could have been swapping genetic material. It could have went through pangolins and then to bats and then to humans, something like that.
So I might be jumping ahead here, but next week we're going to be talking about unifying theory of biology.
Oh yeah.
It's kind of really important.
There's hot new theory that's out there in biology right now.
How does does this relate to how viruses emerge? How they change?
It's a really important understanding the unifying theory of biology. You would, in order for this thing to jump, right? It's not just a physical jump of this virus into a new host. It's not easy to do for a virus. Viruses have all kinds of little bells and whistles for gaining access to cells. Mm-hmm. And in order to do that, they can't just jump from a pangolin to a human and have it just work out perfect. It might, but what really helps is that if the original virus population that was in the pangolin, if it had some sort of a mutation, right, that allows it to gain entry into humans, and then once that is in a human, that population can then, be modified even further by your immune system. Your immune system is going to kill viruses that don't have quite the right stuff, right, to get into your cells. Or maybe the ones that can't get into your cells at all, they'll never leave behind baby viruses, right? Only the ones that have just the right mutation that pass them on to their little virus babies can gain access to your cells and then go on. And the genomic data that they're publishing has shown that that's exactly what happened. That when you look at this virus's genome, you can see where mutations occurred that are not in the pangolin, right? And that are not in the bat. So these are new viruses, brand new babies, right? That came out, they were modified after gaining access to humans. And through this kind of selective process, they've changed.
The same process in the unifying theory of biology,
it's the
right?
same one
Mutation
that explains,
being one of the big drivers behind it.
Yeah, it's the same thing that explains how you can get a bird develop slowly over time from something that looks more like a dinosaur.
But this happens a lot quicker.
This happens really fast because a bunch of things about viruses. Their replication rate, the rate at which they reproduce is just nuts, right? So we reproduce a couple times over 40, 20 years or something like that, and they're doing this every day. Millions of them are, and so they also have a really high mutation rate. They're sloppy at making copies of themselves, especially RNA viruses, and that's what this one is. So they have mutations a lot. So there's lots of opportunities for a new mutation to appear, and then that if it helps gain access to a new host, then it's off to the races. This is a very successful virus. This new virus has popped up. It's made 80,000 new. It's like found 80,000 new people to replicate in. It's going crazy. So
is this why viruses do what they do? Do they have to occupy a host in order to replicate?
They do, and that would be one of the big. If they can't do that, that virus would go extinct just like that. Boom. if it can't get access to a new host, if you know, say the virus is on a bat, right, and it's in the fecal material of a bat or something like that, and a human walks by and picks it up, not knowing what it is, who knows? I mean, that's total speculation. But say a human handled or got into a cave and got some on his fingers, right, and then rubbed his face. If that virus can't make that move because it doesn't have the genetic material to do so, this virus never occurs. It never exists, right? It just stops cold. It never leaves the bat. This one had the right mutation at the right time, and now it's got a new host. It's got us. That's how it works. Yeah, and we're doing a whole show on this, revolutionary idea in biology that's really making waves. It's the unifying theory of biology. It's an amazing thing. We're doing a whole show on that next week, and we try to convince our listeners next week that this is a life or death. We got to understand how this works. It's a life or death thing, and here's a perfect example that theory can explain how viruses emerge, and that's a very life or death thing. So make sure you check that out next week. But we're going to continue with coronavirus right now. So here once this thing starts making international headlines, crazy new reports come out. So NPR reports February 8th that China is censoring posts about the coronavirus. This appears to be a real thing that they were doing. I think that they were trying to keep the panic down, which is something that we're seeing happening right now in our country. Yep. So a big Chinese CDC, the Chinese CDC published an epidemiology report February 11th. This is on almost 80,000 cases that are already happening by February 11th. And they analyzed who is dying of the disease and who's mostly vulnerable to it. And there's a bunch of really interesting things that this report tells us. First of all, really, really interesting. It reported 889 totally asymptomatic cases of coronavirus. People were carrying it and had no idea they were sick.
Wow.
Right.
And that was like not very many. It's like 2% of the total, but that's a lot. If 889 people go walking around, that's a lot. This is where we know that about 80% of cases are mild, and that the fatality rate at that time was about 2.3%. So that's actually a lot. That's more than seasonal flu, a lot more. Also in that, we found out that the most vulnerable category of people are elderly people.
Sure.
So people over 60, the case fatality rate goes up a lot. It can be as much as 10%.
And then when they reach 70, it goes up even more.
It goes up even more, yeah.
Yeah.
So this is a problem for people's mom, dad, grandpa, grandma. It scares me. My parents, they're in their 70s. They're vulnerable. I was happy to see, though, that a lot of times these kind of diseases can affect the really elderly and very young. And for some reason, this one does not seem to affect children, toddler-age children. And so that's actually great news.
They are carriers, though.
They could potentially be carriers.
Yeah, they could be carriers.
And they don't know to wash their hands and
they're
not
not good
touch
at
their
that.
face. They do the opposite.
Right.
I'm learning.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was happy, because we both have little babies, and that was very concerning for me, and it was good to hear that. So February 12th, Jim Baker claims that his $120 silver solution kills coronavirus on some sort of ad show. So
Does it have snake oil in it?
It's pretty much pure.
Is that
snake
like
oil.
on 3 o'clock in the morning QVC type thing?
Yeah, it's QVC. I went and checked it out because I wanted to make sure that this was like a true claim, right? Because this is like, the late night television hosts were going crazy with this, and I thought, really? And I watched it, and he says, he's got some expert there, and they make the claim. So February 16th, Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas claims, quote, "Now we don't have evidence that this disease originated there, but because of China's duplicity and dishonesty from the beginning, we need to at least ask the question to see what evidence says about whether or not this came from a Chinese lab." So that's what he's talking about. Because a couple blocks away from the Wuhan seafood market, or miles away, is a research lab. And so this claim was amplified by lots of news organizations that we need to look carefully. And some of my students have heard this because asked where this originated, 33% thought they knew about Wuhan. They circled Wuhan. 74% said China. one person said a CIA lab, and that's out there too. And then 7% said it came from a Chinese lab, that it was like a weapon. And so there's actually genetic evidence from the research they've been doing. This virus, the way it's able to get inside of a human host, there are known ways to do that, right? That we already have, that we, by researching viruses, there's certain things that we would do, right? If we were going to have this virus get into a cell. This virus has totally figured out a new way that no one had ever guessed before. And so it's very unlikely this thing was engineered. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of unlikely anyway. But my students had heard this, and this is going around. February 24th, Trump administration requests $2.5 billion to address the coronavirus outbreak. And he's getting more than that. They asked for $2.5 billion, and Congress said, we'll give you 8 or 10. You should take more. February 24th, Rush Limbaugh claims media is weaponizing outbreak to embarrass Trump, says coronavirus is the common cold. And I checked on that, and he said that. February 25th is when the public relations poll about Corona beer came out. February 25th, this is where it's starting to get fast. CDC announces spread to U.S. likely, not a matter of if, but when.
Right.
They called that one. February 27th, 2 days later, outbreaks reported in Italy and Iran. And everybody jumped all over them and said, oh, it's Italy, it's Iran, right? Of course, they're going to start saying things
pointing
about...
fingers.
Yeah, pointing fingers. They don't know what they're doing. February 27th, Japan cancels elementary and high schools for a month. They said go home early for spring break and don't come back for a month. February 27th, this is all like last week, right?
Wow.
Yeah. This is getting fast.
Wait, it's March? Okay.
It is now March. FDA reports supply chain shortage of unnamed drug used in coronavirus treatment. They said they're already seeing shortages of a drug. And they didn't name what drug it was.
Well, there is a patent on the vaccine, isn't there?
Right. Is that a joke?
No.
No. The patent for the vaccine is for a different coronavirus.
Oh, God. Okay.
Yeah, that was a wild rumor from somebody who didn't understand that there's more than one coronavirus.
Right,
yeah.
right.
So there's drugs.
That was on the government website, the patent website.
The drugs, and it is. You can find that patent, but it's not for this coronavirus.
Right,
it won't do any good. It won't do any good. This unnamed drug that's now in a shortage, it's a drug you can use for all kinds of stuff. Like, 'cause this is a respiratory disorder, right? It causes pneumonia. So this is a drug that can treat pneumonia, a symptom of the virus's disease, right? So this drug is already witnessing shortages because it's produced in China. And they've used a ton of this stuff in China to treat people for coronavirus in China. And now we're running out of it.
So what is, I don't know if you encountered this in your research, but what about flu vaccines? Because one of the suggestions that the medical folks have is to be sure you're vaccinated for the common flu.
Yeah.
Because the symptoms are kind of similar, right?
Yeah,
and you don't want to mistake it for...
And there's also, it could be a complication, right? If you have the flu, seasonal flu, and then you get coronavirus simultaneously, that could compromise your immune system. It could put you in the bracket of one of these people who's at higher risk. So it is a good idea to go get a flu vaccine. It's not going to help you against coronavirus directly. But like you said, for the medical field, it's good because then they won't have as many cases of seasonal flu coming in where they have to do the testing, right?
Yeah, more
so
space.
For everybody, it's a good thing to go do that. Get your flu shot. And a lot of the people I've been I've been listening to a podcast that I want to plug here. That's incredible. I kind of plagiarized them for a lot of this information. I did go back and check their sources, though. I really was thorough here. It's This Week in Virology. It's a great podcast. It's a little detailed. They talked over my head a lot. So I don't know if it's for a lay audience. We're better at explaining stuff than they are by far, but they were great. And listening to them, they kept making this joke like look, there's already a vaccine against seasonal flu, and seasonal flu has killed more people in the U.S. this year than this virus has, right? It's killed something like, I think we're on something like 7,000, 3,000 case fatalities from seasonal flu. And nobody gets their vaccine for seasonal flu.
Sure.
And people are begging for a vaccine for this one, and it's only killed 10 people now in the U.S., right?
So get your flu shot.
Get your flu shot.
Yep. Okay, well, I think we have to go to a break really quick. Before we go, though, be sure and check out our Facebook page and also our Patreon page. Like we've said in previous episodes, we work hard to get the information out to you. If you enjoy listening to us, please go and contribute just a little bit. You can sign up for $3 a month. Not a lot to pay, and we're not making a profit off of this. We have a lot of costs that we incur, but we're doing this mainly to get information, the science, important information like what we're talking about today, to you, the listeners. So check out our Patreon and contribute if you'd like.
Hello. We're back. The Science Nights in the morning. We're still going through our timeline. We got some more surprises for you for what's going on with coronavirus. So the FDA is reporting a supply chain shortage. February 27th, February 28th, we have our first report of transmission of unknown origin in the United States, indicating most likely human-to-human transmission in the U.S. So we had cases in the U.S., but they were from people who came from Wuhan, right? So those people were put in quarantine, and no transmission was happening outside of that. But on February 28th, we had our first one. February 28th also, this is crazy, Department of Health and Human Services, a whistleblower in the U.S., seeks federal protection for alleging, quote, that staff were sent into quarantine areas without personal protective equipment, training, or experience in managing public health emergencies, safety protocols, and the potential danger to both themselves and members of the public they came into contact with. They also reported that when the staff raised safety concerns, they were admonished by blank, redacted. They named somebody here, and we don't know who that person is. They were admonished by this person for decreasing staff morale, accused of not being team players, and had their mental health and emotional stability questioned, unquote.
That sounds true, right?
I think that probably happened. And it's interesting that on basically the first days of our outbreak here, we had something very similar happen, and everybody was eating the Chinese alive for what they were doing, and we are seeing the same thing here.
Wow.
So February 28th, now this is interesting. Trump rally in South Carolina. I don't want to get political here, but this has bearing on teasing about.
I remember this.
This is all about truth from fact from fiction, and this is an interesting one. You probably know what I'm going to say, but you might not know that I'm actually going to kind of come to Trump's defense here. He said that Democrats are politicizing coronaviruses. This is a rally. I watched the entire thing, and this was brutal for me to do. I watched this entire rally. Claimed it is the new hoax. Media reports that he said that coronavirus is a hoax. He didn't say that. He said that the fact that Democrats are politicizing this is the new hoax, which is not the same thing. And so they ran with it. Some news organizations did tease out the subtleties in what he said, which, there was plenty of other stuff he said that was way worse, right? But he didn't actually say that coronavirus is a hoax. February 28th, 83,000 people infected worldwide, 3,000 killed, indicating about a 3% mortality rate. So things are happening fast. February 29th, first U.S. death from coronavirus. February 29th, the FDA reveals a new policy for rapid testing. This is going to have bearing on something that was said today, which we're taping this. We got to admit, we're taping this on Thursday, everybody. So by the time you hear this on Saturday, things will have totally changed. But I've got the timeline's important because something happened just today. March 2nd, U.S. death toll is 6. March 2nd also, Wuhan evacuee prematurely released after 2 negative tests. Goes to the San Antonio Mall before being placed back into quarantine. This isn't very funny. I guess it's anxiety that I'm laughing. March 4th, the World Health Organization Director General announces that the death rate is actually closer to 3.4%, which is a lot. It's not that much to be scared about, but if you take 3.4% of 250 million people, that's a lot. That's 5 million. I'm not saying that that it's going to be like that, but right now the data we have, that's the death rate. On March 4th, Trump said that he has a hunch that 3.4% is a false number. And he goes on then to, and of course the news just ate him alive for this. He's contradicting the World Health Organization. He did say that it's a false number, and he probably shouldn't have. He goes on to explain, this was on Fox News, and I heard the whole thing. He goes on to explain that a lot of the cases are mild, right? Like we talked about, 80%. And that indicates that probably when the dust settles, the fatality rate probably will be much less than 3.4%.
Well, he also explained that people should go back to work if they feel ill, which is counter to what the CDC
and the
said.
media ate him alive for that too.
Yeah.
The way he said it was like, it's just the way he talks, right? He goes, some people are going to work anyway. And he didn't say you shouldn't do that, right?
Right. Oh,
he just said that people are
All
going
right.
to work anyway, and so it's probably fine. He is trying to keep this and make it seem like it's not as bad as it is, which maybe isn't a good mood or a good move. I don't know, but
Interesting.
they are taking stuff he's saying out of context and they're eating him alive. And it would be better if he said things coherently.
Sure.
And factually, 100% factually, let maybe spokespeople say these kind of things for him. But they are eating them alive, and kind of the Trump rally thing. It was really hard to get to the part where he said it's a hoax because it was distance. It was really distant from other stuff he was saying. Mm-hmm. Okay, but this recent one, the New York Post. I got this from New York Post, which is kind of the regular mainstream media was basically going crazy about this. And according to the FBI, so Trump claimed yesterday, that he is overturning an Obama-era ruling that is leading to quicker testing. And nobody knows what rule he's talking about. This is false. Mm-hmm. The Daily Caller news article posted something about this, and they're basically saying, he's definitely he's fixing things that were broken by Obama. And when you look on the link that they post to the old rule, it's not an old rule. It's the current guidelines from a press release by the FDA that happened 4 days ago. So there was no old rule. It's just there was testing and stuff that had to be done, and then they said we don't have to do that. And there was no Obama era rule that he overturned. And so he's trying to. Now the media is going crazy. They're saying, you know what he's doing? He's blaming this on Obama, and that's not really what he's doing either. But nobody knows what he's doing. It's just it's weird.
Well, there's an election coming up. So.
Yeah. But according to the FDA, there was a draft guidance for laboratory developing tests proposed in 2014 to replace a policy of enforcement discretion, where the FDA sometimes chose to enforce these rules and sometimes didn't. And these rules in 2014 were ultimately not implemented. And that might be what he's talking about, but there's nothing there. And so that's where we are today, ladies and gentlemen. I hope this was good for you. We talked about a lot of stuff, and I'll keep looking into this, and you can always call us if you find something you think is weird or not true. I could try to get to it, but please don't make me do it too much because this is painful.
Sure, but you can definitely call us on the hotline 432-217-1983. Again, that's 432-217-1983.
So, Conley, quickly before we leave, you interviewed Dr. Ekta Escobar today, this morning. This will be a couple of days ago now, people listening.
On Thursday.
What was she's a real doctor, right?
Oh, yeah.
What was her recommendation, real quick, for people? Is it to
basically not to travel?
Okay.
Keep clean, wash your hands with soap and water. For the elderly to not kind of hermit yourself a little bit. Well, not hermit yourself, but hermit yourself a little bit.
Don't travel. Don't get out of your house.
Don't get out. Don't get around large groups of people if you can help it. But there are a lot of people out there that do work around a lot of people. So they have to make the small tweaks in their life in order to stay sanitary.
Yeah. Cover your mouth when you sneeze.
I've coined a new handshake.
Okay.
It's called the viral bump. It's where we bump elbows.
I've seen online that we should do the Vulcan greeting.
Are we
Vulcan greeting?
Not even contact
Aren't we
each
sneezing into our elbows now, though?
We're supposed to be sneezing to our
so
elbows.
So that might not
elbows.
be the best. Do the Vulcan greeting, right?
Yeah. Well, have a great morning, guys. We're Science in the Morning. We'll see you next time.